Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for Links in the Chain. And while the Lightning Network races towards adoption, the key developers in the field work to make sure that it's ready and fit for purpose. And I speak now with one such developer, a key player in the field and history of Bitcoin, and a countryman of my own from Australia, the one and only Rusty Russell. Rusty, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Asher.
All right, so Rusty, obviously one of the most important elements we need to speak about in sort of news headlines that you've made recently was the discovery of a pretty serious bug in the Lightning Network. Now, can you help explain for us lay people a little less versed in the technical details what exactly the bug was, how you patched it, and what implications this has for the Lightning Network as a whole?
Right, okay. Well, the bug itself was relatively straightforward, as things always are once you know what they are. Every implementation has to check when it has an agreement with someone, that the agreement is in fact being carried out and being valid. There are a lot of places in the spec where we insist exactly on the fine details, all the really complicated places we got. Unfortunately, the spec didn't list one of the simple ones. When someone initially creates a channel in the Lightning Network, so they put funds in to start with, you do actually have to check that they actually put the funds in and they put in the amount that they said they did. It sounds elementary, but there's a whole heap of other checks which are much subtler, which of course we spend a lot of time on. It was kind of embarrassing to find this in a way, but fortunately we were doing some testing, and this is exactly the kind of thing that that such tests reveal. You do tests for the obvious things that no one would get wrong, and you realize that actually we did. So once we discovered this in our own implementation and realizing that the spec itself, which obviously should have specified that you would do this check, didn't specify it, I contacted the developers of the other implementations and discovered that they had similar issues, which I don't know if that makes it more or less embarrassing, to be honest. But given that we'd discovered it ourselves and it wasn't being exploited in the wild, we chose to just quietly fix it and announce later on that there had been an issue, to give everyone plenty of time to upgrade.
Yeah, so that point I want to touch on a bit there, because according to my understanding, you discovered the bug around late August, but the information wasn't put out publicly until towards late September. Now, obviously, there's a clear sort of reason and purpose for that, so as not to widely inform any potential scammers or hackers who might want to utilize and exploit this bug. But generally, I mean, the delay of that information, a potentially risky bug that is out there that could be discovered in the wild, delaying that information out there, some argued that that could be considered as sort of, not informing the public, not giving everyone the information that's out there. What's your take on that delay and the sort of the dual narratives of that idea?
There are no good answers here, right? I mean, clearly, if you've got a bad problem, you've got a bad problem. Ideally, this question wouldn't come up because you'd never have such an issue. But in practice, you do have to balance between informing the public in general and informing people who are going to exploit it. So the standard practice is to apply for something called a CVE number, which gives a unique number to a particular bug, give everyone plenty of chance to upgrade, and then reveal the full details at a later date. In this case, we had 3 major implementations and 2 minor ones that all had the similar issues. So we had to coordinate between everyone to make sure everyone was released, had an upgrade to go to, and then you have to give it a little bit to make sure there's no problems with everyone upgrading. And then at that point you can go, okay, now we can catch the laggards by saying, okay, by the way, hopefully you've upgraded because there was an issue, and then after that you come out with full disclosure. So that whole episode can take quite a while, and 90 days is pretty much the industry standard, which is what we ended up hitting. Right. And still, even with that timeline, we were fairly lucky. But there were attempts in the wild, at least one that we know of, to steal someone's funds using this. Once we announced that it indeed there was an issue, but before we announced what it was.
Right. So then I suppose I want to talk about the issue of managing expectations when it comes to developing and rolling out new technologies like the Lightning Network, because there seems to be a sort of a narrative that comes more from the developer side of things that says, look, this is a work in progress, this is an important innovation, but there may be bugs and problems along the way, and that seems to be understood well within the development community. But not always necessarily in, I guess, the more retail element of the community. I mean, currently we see around current statistics, there are a little over 10,000 nodes in action in the Lightning Network, and a lot of players out there don't necessarily have the sophistication or know-how to understand that this is still a work in progress. Is that a concern to you? And if so, how do you address that?
Yeah, so absolutely. There's always this, as a developer, you get excited about the technology, and that's wonderful and everything else. But you've also got to try to make sure you convey the risks as well. And people do get really excited about these things, and that's great. Look, if you've got some spare funds and you want to, set up a node and play with this is fantastic. And if you're a business and you understand the risks, this is something as an early adopter you might want to start looking at. But, the developers of all the implementations have been very clear that, this is still early days. And even if it weren't early days, the fact that you're actually using your funds and they're online and available all the time presents an element of risk that is still something that the Bitcoin community as a whole wrestles with, right? Now we have dedicated things like hardware wallets designed to keep your funds safer than they would be if they were just, sitting on your phone or on your laptop, right? So, the Bitcoin community has built up these defenses against, the problems involved in keeping these funds safe. Lightning, being newer, is still earlier in that ramp. And I think that's important for people to realize.
Right. So then I guess at what point do you feel the Lightning Network will be fit for purpose, ready for mass release and ready to say with a fair degree of confidence that there aren't any of these network threatening bugs out there, and that generally, obviously, nothing has to be perfect, but at what point do you see it being ready for wide adoption?
So if you've got a phone, it comes with security updates pretty regularly. As an industry, we're pretty terrible at actually keeping things secure. The best we do is we kind of keep on this treadmill where you have to upgrade. I'm trying to think of some software that you can just fire and forget these days, that faces a network, a hostile network, that you can just install and then just leave for 10 years without getting hacked. As far as I can tell, it doesn't exist. So unfortunately, the bar for Lightning is pretty high. We want to create something where, we create something secure and, fundamentally unhackable as possible with as many safeguards as we can. But, this is software. And if we're going to learn one thing about software, it is that this is a very hard game. And this is one of the reasons that people have complained that development goes really slowly. But of course, we're trying to be incredibly careful. We're not just looking after our own money, but other people's. And it is important that, that we take all those precautions and we get this right. And part of that is one of the reasons that we went through this disclosure process this time is because we did want to do kind of a dry run, right? This was not a bad bug in the sense that it wasn't found in the wild. We didn't discover it the hard way, which is by losing funds. We discovered it ourselves. But it was worth going through, the formal steps that we would go through if there were a more serious bug in the wild, simply to get everyone in the community and everyone aware of how these things are expected to go.
Certainly so. And I suppose as well now then, turning from the elements of bugs and the issues within the system, I've got you here, Rusty, to as well just talk about the positives and potential of the Lightning Network, because we do need to not forget what the goal here is and what the aim is for the project in its final form. Do you feel the Lightning Network is living up to expectations, and do you think it still has the potential that people put out for it to really solve those scalability issues around the Bitcoin network?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of interesting things. So for about 20 years, I worked on Linux, right? And Linux always had this goal that everyone thought was the goal, which was basically to displace Microsoft Windows. It was going to become, the year of the desktop, and that's what we thought we were doing. We were building this operating system. Surely we'd take over Windows, and that never happened. But it was successful in hugely other ways. So the same thing with Bitcoin and with the Lightning Network. We've built this incredible thing, but it's always risky to predict exactly where we're going. I think people will find uses for this that we currently don't expect. And so when I find people doing novel things with Lightning, I'm always really excited, because I think that's actually, where we're going to be. Because Lightning does give you the ability to send 1 cent trustlessly of a bearer asset halfway around the world. And it's hard to imagine what we'll do with that, because we've never had that ability before. So, you can think of some obvious things that it can replace that already exist. But what you can't think about is things that don't exist because we couldn't do them before. And so I'm really looking forward to, as entrepreneurs come along, they come up with things maybe they wanted to do, but they couldn't do it because there simply wasn't a way to do it. And now Lightning exists. They come along and they go, wow, that is the missing piece for so much grander vision. So, this is one of the reasons I'm so excited about the Lightning conference coming up, because there's a whole group of makers and people who are dealing in this space and building one level up on top of Lightning, and all the ideas and the things that they're trying to do. And that's what I find really exciting.
Yeah, I was going to bring up that Lightning conference. It's an interesting one. So being held later on this, in October, later on this month in Berlin, Germany, 19th to 20th. What do you expect to come out of such a conference? I mean, you just sort of alluded to the sort of power of getting these people here in a room together to talk and really sort of hash out beyond the foundations and fundamentals. But are there any particular goals that you're hoping for to come out of such a conference?
Well, obviously, all the key developers are going to be there, and it's always exciting. It's also a lot of fun. We've been working on this I've been working, on Lightning for over 4 years now. We've been in the spec process for well over 2 years, almost 3. So, we get along really well personally, but we're also all very excited about what's happening in the future. So that's always great. But from my previous experience with having these initial community conferences, while the community is still small enough to kind of really fit in one room or one venue, is that it's the things that you don't expect. There's a certain catalyst element of getting people together, and people start projects and they really things bloom that come out of these conferences because you had everyone in the same room talking to each other. And so it's hard to predict what's going to happen going in. But my previous experience makes me incredibly optimistic that we'll see some great announcements coming out of this. Perhaps in the few future years, people will say, "Oh, that's right," and this started back in Berlin in that October weekend.
It's amazing to hear that sort of optimism coming from you. It sounds a lot, I speak to a lot of people in the field who are there sort of in the early days of Bitcoin, back in 2011, 12, 13, who were at these small conferences back when it was, people were handing out 0.1 of a Bitcoin for free to sign up your email, all these sort of early days setups, and how it's changed since then and how much has happened there. Now it seems you seem to sort of be putting out there that this layer 2, Lightning Network development has the same potential to have that sort of exponential growth from there. Is that sort of how you feel about where we are in the community right now?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because Christian Decker, who's been in Bitcoin, for a long time, a very early developer and interested party, he very much likens the Lightning Network community and the feel that it has to kind of Bitcoin around the 2011 days. And I'm not quite that early, but it certainly feels similar to me as that that early excitement. Where we're still kind of discovering what we can do with things, and that's what gets me up early in the morning to keep working on this stuff, because there is so much incredible potential in what we're doing, and I think we will see that come out as people build further layers on top.
So then again, I guess just to pull back to that sort of that bigger question there, that more philosophical question about where we stand as an industry. I mean, people have claimed that Bitcoin, at least in its current form, isn't living up to the medium of exchange sort of promises that were made in the early days. Others say now it serves more functionally as a store of value. And here you were, earlier on, you suggested that, the use cases are still going to come. We just need to build these foundational layers, and then entrepreneurs and creative thinkers can come along and build on top of that with the new technology. Can you just sort of expound on that theory a little bit and tell me, in regards to with the conference and what might be coming there, what you sort of see optimistically for the future?
Yeah, so if you look at the stages of the Lightning Network, we started with this idea, just first we discovered that it was possible to create something like the Lightning Network. But there were a lot of steps between a paper that said, hey, here's a couple of ideas that you can make into a Lightning Network, and here's how it would actually work. Here's all the pieces that you need together. And we're still in that journey. There's still a lot of things that we are enhancing and discovering and building a better UX and everything else. And at some point, it becomes so easy to use, so straightforward, that you've really got something compelling. And then it just needs some spark, some use case, some killer app, something to really drive it. And my experience has led me to believe that I have no idea what that is. But it has also led me to understand that if you build something that is incredibly useful and has all these uses, then people will come along and use it. They will find something, and you look at that and go, wow, why didn't I think of that? But probably the first time you hear it, you go, well, that's stupid. No one's ever going to do that. And then, in retrospect, it's obvious that it was brilliant, and you just had no idea of the power of that. So as an engineer, for me, it's interesting to build these systems that people can do incredibly useful things with. In this case, incredibly empowering things with. And I think you're right. There is a certain early dream of Bitcoin. When you first heard about Bitcoin, it was like, wow, it's instant, it's free, it's around the world. And there's like, well, the caveats started coming in. Well, it's not really instant. Well, there's fees. It's not really going to stay free forever. We look at Lightning, we go, well, this kind of brings that promise back. Much more instant bearer asset, much lower fees, and a higher degree of privacy in a lot of cases as well. So I think from a high level perspective, you could say one of the reasons the excitement is back for those of us who are around in the early Bitcoin days is because this does deliver on a lot of the promise that we felt when we first heard about Bitcoin.
Certainly, it sounds like an exciting time to come. Build it and they will come. It'll be interesting to see how that future does indeed play out and what sort of entrepreneurial visions come in the future. Rusty Russell, I want to thank you so much for joining us on BLOCKTV to help break down some of these big issues from small bugs to big philosophies. So much to talk about. We'll be fascinated to see what comes out of that Lightning conference, and we'll be sure to be reporting on every major development. Rusty, thanks so much for joining us, and stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.